Okay, I want to tell you a number. 500,000. That's how many Americans are dead because one family decided their drug was safe and spent 2 decades making sure nobody could prove otherwise. The family is worth $11 billion today. $11 billion, after everything. Their name is Sackler. Their drug was OxyContin. And the receipts on this one are so detailed, so specific, so thoroughly in the public record, that the only reason you might not know this story is because they spent decades and a lot of that $11 billion making sure you didn't. Welcome to Corporate Receipts. Let's start from the beginning. Before we get into the chaos, here's what you need to understand about why this story is different. This wasn't a bad company that made a bad product and got unlucky. This was a deliberate, documented, paper trail confirmed decision to lie to doctors, patients, and federal regulators for 30 years for profit. And the people who made that decision are still rich, still free, still have their names on buildings at Harvard and Oxford. So, the Sacklers. In 1952, 3 brothers, Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond Sackler, bought a small pharmaceutical company called Purdue Frederick. If you only remember one name from this family, make it Arthur. Arthur Sackler didn't just sell drugs. He invented the playbook for how pharmaceutical companies sell drugs. He pioneered the idea of advertising prescription medications directly to doctors, glossy campaigns, paid conferences, branded pens, and notepads. Every pharma company uses that model today. Arthur Sackler built it. He was a marketing genius, and that genius was eventually going to be pointed at something catastrophic. By the 1980s, the family had full control of a company they'd rechristened Purdue Pharma. And in 1995, they developed a new opioid painkiller, OxyContin. Now, I need you to stay with me for this next part, because this is where the story gets genuinely insane. The active ingredient, oxycodone, wasn't new. Opioids had been around for decades. What Purdue was selling was an innovation, a time-release formula. OxyContin would release the drug slowly over 12 hours, they said. Steady pain relief, no dangerous highs and lows, less addictive than short-acting opioids. Not just for cancer patients, for everyday chronic pain, back pain, fibromyalgia, the kind of persistent, grinding pain millions of people live with. The FDA approved it in 1995. It launched in 1996. And what happened next is one of the most well-documented corporate frauds in American history. Here's how Purdue sold OxyContin to doctors. Their sales force, over 1,000 reps, was trained to tell physicians one specific thing. Fewer than 1% of patients who took OxyContin would become addicted. Less than 1%. That number became the justification for tens of millions of prescriptions. Doctors heard it and believed it. Patients heard it and believed it. And it was a lie. The source of that claim was a 5-sentence letter. Not a study, not a clinical trial, a letter, published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 1980. It covered patients who received opioids in a controlled hospital setting. Purdue took that letter and turned it into scientific proof that their drug was safe to hand out for chronic back pain for years at a time. That's bad. But here's where it gets significantly worse. Remember the whole selling point? The reason OxyContin was supposedly different was the 12-hour release. Purdue's own internal research showed the drug wore off in 4 to 6 hours for many patients. Not 12, 4 to 6, which meant millions of people were hitting withdrawal, shaking, sweating, craving, before their next dose was due. And the solution doctors were told to reach for? Increase the dose. There are internal Sackler family emails that are now public record, pulled out through years of court proceedings. Richard Sackler, the family member who ran the company during its peak years, wrote one in 1996 before the launch even happened. He wrote, "The launch of OxyContin tablets will be followed by a blizzard of prescriptions that will bury the competition. Not help patients, bury the competition. That's who was running this company." I want you to pause for a second before we get into the next part, because this is where it stops being a story about a bad drug and starts being something that should have landed people in prison. Purdue didn't just market OxyContin, they paid doctors. Not directly. It was structured as speaker programs. Doctors who prescribed high volumes of OxyContin were invited to become paid speakers at medical conferences. Purdue would fly them to resorts, cover hotels, pay speaking fees, and then ask them to get up in front of other doctors and talk about the drug. The more you prescribed, the more invitations you got. Between 1996 and 2001, Purdue spent over $200 million on these programs. And the FDA? Here's the part that should have been the scandal. The FDA reviewer who approved OxyContin in 1995, a man named Curtis Wright, took a job at Purdue Pharma shortly after the drug was approved. He went from regulating the drug to working for the company that sold it. This is not speculation. This is in the public record. By 2001, OxyContin was generating over $1 billion a year. $1 billion a year. While overdose rates in West Virginia, Kentucky, and Ohio were climbing so fast that local coroners ran out of morgue space. The communities hardest hit weren't Beverly Hills. They were small towns, rural counties, places where a factory had closed and the only thing the local economy had left was a Walgreens and a doctor who'd been told this drug was safe. Here's the thing about corporate accountability in America. Sometimes a company does something so catastrophically harmful that the government steps in. And what happens next tells you everything. In 2007, Purdue Pharma and 3 executives pleaded guilty to federal charges of misbranding OxyContin. They paid $634 million in fines. That sounds significant, until you find out that by 2007, Purdue had already made over $3 billion from OxyContin. The fine was 20 cents on the dollar. The Sackler family members themselves, the owners, the people who made every major decision, were not charged. Not one. They kept going. It wasn't until 2019 that Purdue finally filed for bankruptcy, crushed under 2,600 lawsuits from states, cities, and Native American tribes. In 2020, they reached an $8.3 billion settlement with the Department of Justice. But here's what the Sacklers actually negotiated for themselves in the bankruptcy proceedings. They would contribute approximately $4.5 billion to the settlement fund. In exchange, immunity from future civil lawsuits, no admission of wrongdoing, and they would keep billions of dollars that had already been quietly moved out of Purdue, transferred to family accounts and offshore trusts over the years, before the bankruptcy even happened. Their net worth today, approximately $11 billion. And their names? Still on the Sackler wing at the Metropolitan Museum, the Sackler Gallery at the Smithsonian, buildings at Harvard, Oxford, Columbia. Families whose lives were destroyed by OxyContin walk through airports with nothing. The Sacklers have their names carved in marble. That's not philanthropy. That's a receipt. So how does something like this actually happen? How does a family oversee the deaths of 500,000 people and walk away with $11 billion? And here's the part that actually makes me angry. Not the drug, not even the deaths. The part where it turns out none of it was an accident. The Sacklers didn't get away with this because the system failed. They got away with it because the system worked exactly as designed, for people who could afford to design it. The fake science, the paid doctors, the revolving door regulator, the bankruptcy maneuver that protected family wealth while towns buried their dead, none of that was an accident. Every single piece of it was a decision made by specific people in specific rooms. And that's why the receipts matter. Because the emails exist, the court documents exist, the internal research showing the drug wore off in 4 hours, not 12, that exists too. It's all in the record. The only question is whether anyone's paying attention. You are now. That's kind of our whole thing here. Sources for everything in this video are in the description. DOJ filings, the Sackler emails, court records. Go check them. I want you to. If this is your first time on Corporate Receipts, welcome. We cover the CEO scandals, the boardroom disasters, and the billion-dollar lies that the press releases never mention. Subscribe if you want the receipts delivered straight to you. And I'll see you in the next one.